On March 26th of this year, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu removed the country's defense minister, Yoav Gallant, from his post for criticizing the pace of the government's contentious plan to overhaul the justice system. It was a move that sparked an uproar from Israelis. Hundreds of thousands of protesters took to the streets. Universities closed their doors. Union leaders began discussing strikes. Netanyahu's decision to silence Gallant followed a string of other anti-democratic actions and was the last straw for many of his supporters or even people who worked for him and in his administration. The outrage stretched all the way to New York City, where Israel's Consul General Asaf Zamir resigned from his own post to join the fight for a more equal Israel, and as a direct result of the firing. In his resignation letter, Zamir wrote, quote, "My decision to resign should not be seen as a rejection of Israel or its people. On the contrary, I am taking this step because of my deep love for my country. As a proud Israeli citizen, I believe it is my duty to ensure that Israel remains a beacon of democracy and freedom in the world," end quote. It took 15 days for Netanyahu to reverse Gallant's firing, restoring his role as defense minister. Joining me now is the aforementioned Asaf Zamir. He's a former consul general of Israel in New York. He's a former member of Israel's legislature, the Knesset, and Israel's former minister of tourism. Asaf, good to see you. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Ali.
Boy, the world has changed since March.
Sadly.
And you are no particular fan of Benjamin Netanyahu's, but at the moment your country is at war. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how to describe it. Are hearts hardened, or have Israelis been able to unify around something? Because it's very hard for Israelis to unify around Benjamin Netanyahu, but now you're at war.
I think the country is as unified as it's ever been.
Okay.
And for tragic reasons. I think October 7th was a moment of clarity for many people. And it ended ongoing debates about security priorities, and about possibilities, and about the motivations of people in Gaza or in the West Bank or around us. It was also a moment of clarity for American Jewry that was very divided politically and has reunited most of in support of Israel, because it's very hard to not defend Israel after October 7th,
right,
and its need to make sure in the basis that people are secure when they live there.
And that's not a complicated thing to get one's head around, right? The right of Israelis for safety and peace.
I think that is. I think that's what's happening right now politically in the United States, is that the discourse has shifted from criticism towards the government's policies, which is a legitimate thing, to what you see in the younger generation.
Right, but you're right. But you and I have had this discussion before.
Yeah.
There are some who a long time ago said that criticism of Israel's government is equivalent of anti-Semitism.
I didn't.
And yet you didn't, because you're actually a guy who was critical of the Israeli government, and yet you love not just Jews, but your country.
Right.
And that's a complicated, you're right, that's complicated. But it shouldn't be complicated for the human brain to say that Palestinian self-determination and Israel and Israel's right to be in peace are both achievable in 2023.
Achievable or desirable?
Desirable. Let's start with desirable. And then you tell me about achievable.
Desirable for sure. Israelis have always proved we want to live in peace with everyone around us. That's why whenever we were offered peace, how complicated that it was, we took it in a second. We gave back Sinai for Egypt and did peace with Jordan, and then UAE, Sudan, Morocco, the Oslo Accords, giving authority in West Bank, the disengagement of Gaza in 2006. All of these things were concessions made by Israelis to try and live in peace with our neighbors.
But this particular government, or whatever you want to call it, under Netanyahu, has not been a real good player on that front. And America has not been all that engaged on that front.
This particular government, I have had my disagreements with, and I still do, on a long issue of things. But make no mistake, if we had a different government in power October 7th, that wouldn't have changed Hamas's motivations when we took our eyes off the fence for 8 hours to come in, kill, rape, kidnap, and do everything that was documented that they did. And when asked later, said we want to do it again, just given the chance. That's not because of this government. That's because of their true dream to free Israel from Jews, to turn it all into Palestinian land. And that's what they've said. If they were to say, listen, let's talk about, if there was even a small group in Gaza saying, let's talk about the day after how we can live alongside each other,
Right.
there would be a base to the beginning of a conversation.
The funny
I
thing
haven't
is,
seen
there's
that
a
group.
big group of people who don't hold any power. They're not members of anything. It's
true.
There's no membership in Hamas. There is a big group of people in Gaza and in the West Bank who don't really even think that the Palestinian Authority may be working for them. Yeah. And they want to have that discussion. How does Israel empower them? Because what does that look like? Because that is something that, in fact, Benjamin Netanyahu is specifically responsible for.
Very,
the undermining
very
of a partner.
Very, very hard, given what's happened, to convince the Israeli people that it's justified to empower them.
100% it's hard, but it is your work, right?
By the way, it's even hard to convince people that group is findable. Because the last poll done by Birzeit University, which is an Arab university, showed 70% of Palestinians in Gaza support October 7th massacre.
Right.
70% of most of the people that kidnapped people into Gaza were not Hamas operatives.
Right.
When you see the hostages released, what you see in the street, and these are videos they distribute, are crowds of Palestinians cheering for little old ladies in wheelchairs and girls. It's very hard to look at that, to hear no other voice come out of Gaza and say, we have a partner.
Where would the voice
come from?
Where would the voice come from?
When I was 15, I was a member of a group. I was 15. Yeah. I was a member of a group called the International Center for Peace in the Middle East. It was Palestinian youth, Israeli youth, settlers, people from Tel Aviv, Gaza, West Bank, and we did a photography course together. And then we had an exhibition. You know where that exhibition opened? It was 1995. It opened in Gaza. Yeah. My family, we drove into Gaza. You could think there would be peace out of that. We disengaged in 2006. It's been 17 years where the world has sent endless amounts of money into Gaza, and it's proven now that that money was never used by anyone to try and build a functioning society in Gaza, but used to build an underground terror system to shoot rockets at my daughter.
I totally get it, and you know this. But you're also a guy who thinks about the fact that there has to be a day after.
Yeah.
And you have met people who live in Gaza and who live in the West Bank who are entrepreneurs, who want a better life, who you could imagine as being the minister, like you were a minister of tourism, a minister of something, or a mayor of something. They exist.
Why aren't we hearing them?
You tell me.
I think I don't think they exist in the numbers you do. And I think that if they do, they're afraid to speak because of Hamas.
Okay.
And I think that if they're afraid to speak because of Hamas, then me and they agree that Hamas needs to go.
Okay, so what happens after that?
If it's gone,
I think the world has gotten to that point.
If it's gone,
yeah.
By the way, my opinion is stronger. I think Hamas needs to go. I think Hezbollah needs to go, and I think there needs to be a change in government in the Palestinian Authority, because the last person we handed over Gaza to was Mahmoud Abbas, who then lost it to Hamas. Yep. So we wouldn't do that same mistake.
So there's a guy sitting in an Israeli jail right now, Marwan Barghouti, who a lot of people say, let him out of jail. He's renounced violence, and he might be the leader.
We need to find a leader.
Right.
And he hasn't been chosen yet as a leader. And if he's ever chosen as a leader and proves himself to be Nelson Mandela, we dream for that, because the biggest tragedy in Palestinian history is weak leadership that's never been able to do something positive or constructive towards Israel. I can say this as an Israeli. We've had amazing prime ministers and horrible prime ministers, great governments and horrible governments. We've had opportunities in which we said, let's try. But the Palestinians have never had a courageous Arab Muslim leader that said, you know what, I'm willing to make concessions, I'm willing to speak against part of my people. What we've found in MBZ that said into the entire Muslim world, I'm making normalization with Israel, deal with it later, which broke way to the Abraham Accords. We didn't have that with the Palestinians.
There were no Palestinians in the Abraham Accords. You know that. Of course I do.
Of course I do, but give me a name that could have been there.
But isn't that the problem of the Israeli government right now?
No, it's the problem of the Palestinian. It used to be the problem of the Israeli government.
Yeah.
And after October 7th, a vast majority of Israelis say that's the problem of the Palestinian people. Right. If they don't take a bit of responsibility and generate leadership that we can work with, it can't continue to be our problem after the atrocities of October 7th.
You know the reality is it will, right?
The reality is my wife, 2 months ago, looked at places in our house that she needs to will hide in with my daughter if terrorists come and no one comes to protect her. That's not something someone should live through in a normal
Totally
country.
right. But as a guy who thinks about this, because you're a political guy, it doesn't matter how bad the situation is. We're like firefighters. You show up on a fire and you've got to fight it no matter how big it is.
Yes.
So as a diplomat, as an Israeli, as a former Israeli official, probably a future Israeli official, the problem needs to be solved. And it's not going to be sufficient to say,
It needs to be
solve it on your own.
It needs to be solved. It's going to take time, and it can't be a periodical solution just in Gaza. The region needs to have a solution with the darkness against the light, okay? And that's not a matter of Jews versus Muslims or West versus East. It's a matter of fundamental Islam that goes after everything which is liberal and the rest of us.
You know, that's not what the PA was, right? The Palestinian Authority wasn't that.
The PA was not that.
They were secular.
The PA was not that. And the second they were handed over Gaza, they lost it to Hamas. And the reason there's no election since then in Gaza and in the West Bank is because every poll shows that Hamas would win.
But I've had Israeli officials sit there and say, you know, they're undemocratic. They haven't had an election. Every Israeli knows what would happen if there was an election in the West Bank.
Because the majority of Palestinian people would vote Hamas back into power.
Unless they had a better option.
But the PA was a better option, and they voted it out. It was a secular, peace-seeking, theoretically option, and they voted in Hamas, which indoctrines into the school books that I'm a terrorist, that if you kill me, you'll go to heaven and find 70...
All right, so we have to fix all of that. But sure. As I've met from a lot of Israelis who say you're not allowed to talk about the Nakba in Israeli publicly funded schools either, right? It all depends on where you think the story started. For a lot of Palestinians, they think it started in 1948. They call it the Nakba, but you can't learn about that in an Israeli public school. So Israeli kids also grow up to think that the Palestinians are terrorists.
You happen to be sitting in front of a person that helped establish the first bilingual Jewish-Arab school in Jaffa, where you learn about everything. And you learn both narratives because it's important to understand both narratives, to try and coexist. But make no mistake, there is not one textbook in Israel that says all the people that live in Gaza want to kill you. It doesn't exist. There's not one textbook that says if you die trying to kill Palestinians, you will go to heaven and find...
But are the textbooks that tell you that those people are not legitimate refugees who have a right to come back to Israel where their homes were in 1948?
It's not the same. It's not the same because it doesn't incite violence towards them. It's a political opinion. I might not hold it. I can fight to change it. But it's an opinion. It's how you write history. I can defend that opinion, by the way. I can say why it's not exactly how you said it. But it doesn't educate these kids that what they're grown up to do is to hold a gun and kill Arabs.
What does the solution look like to you?
The short-term solution has to be... By the way, I heard your former segment. Khan Yunis, where could they go? We sent a map. You said they sent a map. We can't understand the map, the reporter said. I don't know any other army in the world that calls before they come.
Yeah, except that there's no internet.
It calls
Most people don't have power and they don't have internet. So if you give me an SMS to tell me get off my block, I don't get it.
You're a member of a nation. When you fought overseas in Mosul or the Taliban, you didn't say move here and move there, and there were no protests here about civilian casualties. And the war crime, targeting civilian casualties, is a war crime. But using them as human shields, that's a war crime for sure. And then you have no other option. And that's the point we're at right now. If Hamas was to put down their guns and say, we surrender, there wouldn't be no civilian casualties anymore, because we're not looking to fight inside. We're looking to make sure people can live around Gaza in safety. We're trying to do that with a minimum number of casualties. But we're at a pivotal point in Jewish life where there's a broad understanding that if we don't do it, no matter what, at any price, we won't be able to continue living there.
Yeah. Asaf, it's always a pleasure speaking to you. May we speak many, many more times, because we must.
Amen to that.
Because we're going to need a solution to this problem.
Amen to that. I want to tell you one more thing. A vast majority of Israelis dream of peace in the Middle East. All we've ever wanted is to be left alone and to be able to live in a very small piece of land that the United Nations said we can live in, that I am ninth generation to, that we've been in thousands of years. If people would leave us alone, we'd be hugging everyone.
Yeah, there are some provocations, you would agree, right? That the Israeli government has been involved in.
I agree with everything, but I'm saying at the base of the majority of people, Israel is a democracy, has people I agree with and people I don't. Extreme right, extreme left, everything. It's vibrant, it's transparent. We have national press, what others don't. And it's a big discourse in Israel. But if you ask the majority of Israelis and the majority of governments they've chosen, it's not the people burning olive trees, it's the majority of people. They would make great concessions.
Yeah, well, the few people who are doing those things are problematic.
I agree.
They are problematic. We'll continue the discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here, my friend.
Thank you.
Asaf Zamir is the former Consul General of Israel in New York.